Hello, good afternoon. Right. I appreciate you all choosing to attend this session today. I'm Shiva. I work as a technical solutions engineer in Architect, and he is.
Hi everyone, I'm Prasad. I'm a senior solutions architect with Akamai Professional Services. We are very much excited to share this topic with you. So keep this interactive, ask any questions if you have. Over to Siva.
Thank you. All right. Let's assume a situation where Scott, the marketing officer of escort.com, is planning to run a marketing campaign for one of the new products that he has launched. On a Monday morning, he walks into the office assuming that he can purge all the CP codes that are tied to his marketing sites. We all run into Luna admin issues. Alas, he lost access to his Luna. What if I tell you you don't have to depend on Luna or your admin to make any changes to your Akamai platform or managing any of your Akamai products? Well, we got this sorted. Akamai CLI is an offering that you have where you can manage, change, implement the API offerings that we have through Akamai CLI, which is built in there. We all have heard this important quote on DevOps where you build it, you run it. When you have a project where all the processes of the project was built within, you get the power to grant anything and everything to govern the project. And Akamai CLI is where it exactly fits into. The agenda that I would like to cover for this afternoon is I would like to do a little old school talk on what Akamai CLI is and what API is and why it is important to have Akamai CLI rather than any CLI or probably any API. And then I'll walk you through how you can install Akamai CLI, the different offerings that we have. And let's say you are trying to develop a module which is not already there in the Akamai CLI. What is the architecture and the style guide that you should be considering when you try to develop a module for Akamai CLI? And then, all right, I have built a module, and how would you contribute that to the existing Akamai CLI? And then I have a small mini hack that I developed for Scott, and then how I developed, and me and Prasad put it together in developing a small module. And then I leave the stage for questions. Like I said, this might sound a little old school. Everybody in here might already know what a CLI is. But I would like to go through the history. So CLI is a text-based offering that you can, that is used to operate software and then systems. It is considered to be faster if you know what you want to type and what you're expecting out. And it is preferred over the GUI because it takes less memory and less CPU. And quickly to the API here. So let's take a smartwatch or probably a cam in your car or the mobile apps that are running in your phone or probably the JS apps that you have. Anything and everything that sophisticates us today has an API running in the background. This is how a typical API architecture would look like. The result of an API call is in the human readable form, but API itself is just machine-to-machine talking. When you make an API call, there are continuous requests sent to the API server, and then API server does the work of checking back with the database and giving you the result in form of a human readable. All right, I know about API, I know about CLI. How would I make an Akamai API call? There are three things that you should consider. I would assume you all would have a valid Luna Control Center ID. Go into Luna, create an API client for yourself, download the token because this is very important when you're making an API call. You will have to authenticate yourself for making any change, and then you're good to make an API call. All right. So like I already mentioned, and I hope you all had a chance to go to the Launchpad hands-on lab, where you got a chance to use on the API offerings. There are a lot of API offerings already in developer.akamai.com. I would expect you to explore those options. But how would you change it for your business needs? So you can download an open source API client which is preferred for your developing environment. And then, like I said, check out the API offerings that we have on Akamai and then modify it for your business needs. So we might have it just for a single purge call. You can modify it for multiple so that you can make use of it, especially for your own developing environment. I'd like to just, this is just how Luna would look like. And so I have logged in as myself. When you want to create a new API client, click on that. So once you have created a new API client, you would see, like I mentioned, the credential. Create a new credential for yourself. And then let's assume you're doing a PAPI call. So the way that API authorization works, it is that it is different for Purge. It's different for everything else, like put in with one credential. So you can click on Edit Authorization and give yourself any grant. So you might want to just have a read and write access or probably just read access. This is just a small video that I had made using the Docker instance for making an API call. I would like to just walk you through. So I have started the Docker instance in here. So once you have your credentials downloaded, you can add your credentials for making the API call. You just have to make sure it's in the default section. And then for making any API call, in this I have taken PAPI as the example. So you will have to create a JSON, config.json file for making a PAPI request. This will contain your product name and the product ID so that it fetches it from Luna. And then you're good to make an API call. So I would be calling the config.json in here. You can see it there. And the result would look something like this, where it shows that you have made your first successful API call. So this essentially means that you have created your first version in Luna for the property. All right, this is the topic of interest today. So this is all already in there, but why would I go for Akamai CLI? It's because it is very simple and flexible for you to manage and integrate this inside your existing DevOps module. If you're doing just APIs, and if there are any updates that are coming in, you might want to change things in your code itself before you could update the API. Akamai CLI does not ask for that. It does upgrades automatically. And then it is pretty simple to install, which I will show you in a minute. And then we give this offering in 9 different languages, like it is there. Golang, Node.js, Ruby, and then Python and Perl. So it is important that we know what are the existing modules that are there in Akamai CLI already created in for you. The biggest one is the property manager. There's adaptive acceleration, then there is application security. In CPS, you have the CLI module already in place, so if you want to make any certificate renewal or new certificate, you can use the Akamai CLI for it. And in my personal opinion, I guess Purge would be the most useful CLI module when you have constant things changing in your website, and then you don't want to log into Luna, find the CP code, put it in there, Purge. I would, in the end, show you how easy, if you have the CLI module installed, to purge a session. All right, so how do you install Akamai CLI? If you are a Linux or a Mac-based user, you can download the binary from developer.akamai.com. And you just have to make sure you move it to the right folder, and then you're good to go with the Akamai CLI. In Windows, it's pretty much the same. You get the .exe file in developer.akamai.com, go ahead, move it to the right folder, and then you can start working with Akamai CLI. If you are a Mac user, you have an additional offering where you can use it through Homebrew. So if you have Homebrew installed, you can just say brew Akamai install, and it'll install the Akamai CLI for you. In the video that I had made, I showed you how I can use Docker for making API calls. It holds good for Akamai CLI as well. You can create multiple instances using the Docker so that you can play around with different instances in one PC. Or you can probably choose to compile it directly from a source, like GitHub, which is very much used in Akamai. You can download the binary file from GitHub. It is developed in Golang, so you will have to download, it automatically downloads the Glide package for you, which is the package manager for Golang. And different things that you might want to consider if it is Linux environment, Windows environment, and then move the binary to the right folder and you're good to go. So once you have installed the Akamai CLI, this is how it would look like. It would already show you what are the install commands that are available. So uninstall, update, upgrade, anything that you would potentially might want to use is already up in there. All right, so I have downloaded Akamai CLI. What if I want to develop a module for myself? What are the things that I should consider? Library. So regardless of whichever language that you choose to develop this, you will have to make sure all the packages are standalone, and there should not be any dependencies that is related with the CLI. So the library should be a standalone function. And then you can choose among the 9 languages that I mentioned initially, but the preferred ones are Golang, Python, and JavaScript, Node.js. Akamai CLI tries and downloads if there are any dependencies for these languages. So for example, if you're using Golang, the package manager would be Glide. So that gets automatically downloaded. If it is Node.js, it is the NPM. So if you're using anything out of this, then you will have to vendor all the package managers into your CLI manually, because it does not download it automatically for you. I spoke about the credentials that are important for making an API call. So in Akamai CLI, of course, you would make use of a lot of APIs. So it is important that you declare the credentials that are used under each section. So the EDGRC is the default credentials section. If you have additional credentials, you can put it under the section flag. And if at all you have other credentials other than this, you can use it as a variable and call it and use it. All right, Akamai CLI, Akamai itself, for that matter, is all about caching and delivering stuff. So why don't we cache a API call and then make the Akamai CLI more responsive? If you would like to cache a specific API, you will have to include the API URL path and add it with the endpoint, so that the next time when you want to use it, it is in the cache. And if it is a package that you're trying to cache, then this is the standard how you would use where you want to cache a specific package itself. If you would like Akamai CLI to know the changes and the commands that are included with the package manager, you will have to include it with the CLI.json file. That will let the Akamai CLI know about the package and the relevant commands attached to it. Other than working just from the source module, Akamai CLI can fall back to binary, which is there. You can, so if there are any specific changes that you're making and if you would like to commit it to the Git, you'll have to make sure you do it using the binary. Binary signing is a file that comes along with any binary itself. So this just means that there is a suffix .sig with the binary file. This does not guarantee any security, but it is just the MD5 checksum value of the file itself, which just makes sure that the binary does not get corrupted. Um, like I mentioned, Akamai CLI is pretty much dependent on GitHub for all the releases. So if you have a public module that you want to update, then you will have to make sure you commit it to the Git first, so that the next time when there is an update, it looks for the master file and then directly updates any binary that are related to it. Version control is so important in Akamai CLI because there is a master branch which is expected to be always available. And if at all there is a new module that you're developing, it has to be additional new branch and it cannot be a master branch itself. So this is how it has to, so if there is any new development, it has to be a new feature itself, and the master branch is always usable and there is no additional change that you're doing to the master branch itself. So if you would like to update a specific package in Akamai CLI, this is how it would look like. For example, if there is a new module added with the image manager, you would do Akamai update image manager. So all it would do is it would look for the latest binary release and it updates the existing module. It is expected, or maybe in the future we would automatically update this, but for now you will have to use this command for updating any of your packages that are there. So as I mentioned, Akamai CLI depends more on Git. It should adhere with the semantic versioning, which means any first versioning would look like 0.1.0 and then it goes in the increment of 1. So yes, now that you know how the architecture looks like, what is the style guide that you should be considering? This is just like a basic style guide that any developer would already know, but there are certain things that you should be considering while you're doing a naming. So it might look pretty much like a theory when you go through this, but when you're actually developing a module, you run into any error, you would then understand that you have missed one of this. So any executable that you have should be named the way it is on the screen. If you miss a hyphen also, it would definitely throw you an error. There are 3 ways that you can configure input for the Akamai CLI. So it can be an argument, or it can be an interactive input, or it can be overriding of the existing one. Like I mentioned, EDGRC is a flag, and then if there is, there can be instances where your command just wants to run an interactive input, then you can highlight it, which is the default output that you're expecting in caps. And the third one is overriding. So if there is already something which is executed, and you want to force something and override it, then you use a force flag for it. All variables that you try to execute should be in uppercase. So for example, if you're calling a package itself, or you're trying to update a package that is already existing, it would call it only if it is prefixed with Akamai and then an underscore. This might look little very specific, but that's how it is. All standard outputs that you are trying to get out of any package or a module, it has to be sent to stdout. And if it is the error, then it is stderr. So when there are instances where you're purging, like I mentioned, um, it might ask for a status message that it would like to know about. So the standard that it would look like is this. So here, if you're attempting to fetch command and let's say it's purge, it would install, and then if it is a failure, it would throw you an error in here, or if it is success, then that's the next status that you're updating. There can be outputs that you might want to store in a JSON file and then use it for the next call that you might be making. So for those instances, you can put it in a JSON output. And then the coloring for how it would look like. So for headers, you might want to choose yellow. For errors, it is as usual, it is a red. And then if it is a successful output, you might want to select a green. All right, so let's imagine that you have developed a module for yourself. It is not mandatory, I would say, but if you think it's a very good use case for your organization and you want others to make use out of it, I would say you should contribute it to the existing Akamai CLI. And for that, you should be using forking. So a fork is a copy of the repository where you can play around with the changes without actually disturbing the existing project. So once you know that everything is working as expected in your copy repository, then you can probably push it to the Akamai CLI. Before you make any change, there are a few things that you should consider in a module. You will have to make sure that the master branch is up to date. So you will have to fetch the latest changes that are in the upstream, which is the master. And then, like you mentioned in the architecture, because it is a new branch that you have developed, it has to be a new development, it has to be a new branch, and it cannot disturb the master file. And after you have done the changes, you want to push it to the Git. So it is done by adding the file first to the GitHub, and then you would be doing a pull request for it to get updated in the GitHub. So pretty much all of this information is in there in developer.akamai.com. I would strongly suggest you all to explore the available options in there, so that if you run into any issues, you always know where to go. So now that Scott has gone through this session and he has developed a module for himself for purging, yeah, all right.
Is it visible?
Is it visible? So like I mentioned, he was trying to purge all the marketing CP codes. So all he has to do is say refresh marketing, and then it would do the purge for all the CP codes that are under marketing. I think there are 10 CP codes or something. So this is incredible when you don't have to spend so much time in Luna Control Center trying to understand what is the CP code or what is attached to it. Where do I, first of all, do I have permissions to do it? And then do I do it in staging, production? All this is sorted if you have a CLI developed for yourself. I hand it over to Prasad to take over about the other mini hack that we have.
Thank you, Shiva. So just to talk a bit about this, backend it's still using Akamai CLI. So what we wanted to share is you don't have to use the CLI in traditional ways, right? So what this is essentially doing is we have the CP code stored in a text file, and if you're running the same thing again and again on a regular basis, then I know I know we have CLIs, but it's still easier if you don't want to like run the command 10 times on your terminal, right? So what we're essentially doing is it's a bash script which pulls all the CP codes from the file and then runs the CLI in the backend. Right? So the idea is, yeah, you can do things in different ways, or the other option is, if you are a developer, you can write CLIs as well. But when we basically came up with this idea of presenting build your CLI, what I wanted to do is, yeah, we want to encourage you to contribute to the CLI. But being a developer, we also wanted to see how easy or how difficult it is to build a CLI ourselves, right? So that is why we thought we should demo something where I can build a CLI. I see how much time it takes, and I see how difficult it is just to follow the developer.akamai.com guide and come up with the CLI, right? So what I've done is I've just picked a CLI which does not exist. It's Diagnostic Tools API calls, which lets customers self-service troubleshooting. I've built a very primitive CLI. I'm just going to walk you through what are the essential things, just a couple of things. It hardly took me 15 to 20 minutes to come up with this, right? It's very primitive. It just does one function. But if you keep building on it and if you build a package, then you'll come up to a point where you can contribute it and it can go to the main Akamai CLI module itself. But till then, you can still build the CLI for you locally, test it out, and see what is the benefit of it, right? So let me do this. So, okay, give me 1 second. Where is the link? I want the link. Link. You close it.
Link?
Yeah. 1 second. Okay.
No, it might.
Okay. So what I've done is I've just developed a CLI in Python, and I've put it in a repo, Git repo. I'll just talk about a few components that you need first to build a CLI, right? So your executable should be under the bin folder, and this is just a very simple Python script. What it does is it uses the EdgeRC library, EdgeGrid library, takes your credentials, and it just makes an API call to get the IP location. So you just give the IP address to the CLI. It'll give you all the details about that IP address, as simple as that. Now, Diagnostic Tools has more endpoints which you can explore based on whatever your need. So, for example, if you want the logs, right? Most of the ops team would be interested in pulling the logs, give a specific time frame, give a CP code, and pull the logs and see what is the error, where is the error coming from. Then you can add on to this as well. So, yeah, we do plan to update this and come up with a better thing. But just for the sake of this demo, I just wanted to see how much difficult it is to build a CLI yourself. Okay. And the only other thing you need is, apart from the actual Python script or whatever the script you're running in whatever language you use, is the CLI.json file. You need to specify the minimum requirements for what. So in this example, it's Python. So the minimum version of Python needed is 3.7.2, and you name the CLI. It's Diagnostic Tools CLI. If you have an alias, you can give it as well. So a short form to run. And then version, as Shiva said, it has to start from 0.1.0, and then just give a brief description on what the CLI does. To install this, what you need to do is you pull this. Okay, give me 1 second.
Clear. Is it visible?
So what I do is, okay. So what I do is I just say Akamai install and just give the link for the repo. It pulls the CLI into your local, right? It installs the CLI, and you'd see that we have the Diagnostic Tool CLI installed. And to run the CLI, I just say Akamai Diagnostic Tools. I just need an IP address to get the details. So I just say 80 or 8.8.8.8, for example. Right? So it would just give me the details about the IP address itself. So as simple as that, right? So the major thing is to know what steps are involved And if you're a developer, you'd obviously be very good at developing and coding things. It's just HTTP calls to the API endpoints, right? So customize it, contribute to the CLI. We want more and more CLIs to come up because I know it's hard to run the raw API calls, and someone who's a non-developer might not know how to run the API calls. So CLIs will be very easy and very helpful as well. Okay. Do you have anything? Okay. We just had this in our content. So if you have any questions, we'll open it up for the questions. Yeah. Uh, yeah, so you'll have to first install the Akamai package. For Mac, I use a brew install Akamai. It pulls it up from the main repo itself. So you don't need pip. If you have brew, it'll install it into your machine. Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending this session. Hope it was helpful.